Nestled in the hills above Los Angeles, on a quiet cul-de-sac in the Outpost Estates neighborhood, the Mediterranean-style villa once belonged to actor James Gandolfini. Built in the early 1930s, the house was modest by Hollywood standards, 3,800 square feet, stucco walls, dark wood beams, and red tile roofing, but it radiated a sense of history and privacy. Gandolfini reportedly loved the place for its seclusion and quietude. He lived there until shortly before his death in 2013. In 2023, the property was purchased by a couple from Seattle, Anthony and Michelle Barris, both in their late 30s, successful tech entrepreneurs who decided to leave their high-rise apartment for a slower, warmer life in the Hollywood Hills. The first few weeks were ordinary, even idyllic. The couple had the place freshly painted, installed new furniture, and spent long evenings on the terracotta patio overlooking the twinkling lights of the city. But even then, there were moments. We'd hear these footsteps in the hallway upstairs, Michelle later recalled. But they weren't random. They'd start at one end of the hall and stop right in front of the guest bedroom door. Always the same path. The guest bedroom had once been Gandolfini's writing room, where he kept books, movie scripts, and notebooks. The couple had turned it into a minimal guest space, mostly unused. One night, while unpacking boxes alone, Anthony thought he heard a man clear his throat in the hallway, deep, gravelly, impatient. He ran out, but no one was there. Michelle was out for dinner with a friend. The house was locked. Beneath the house was a small wine cellar and utility space Gandolfini had converted into a makeshift editing and screening room. The walls were still lined with faded posters from The Sopranos, Crimson Tide, and The Mexican. Old studio monitors and a rusted editing table still stood against the walls. Anthony, curious about the house's past, began spending time down there, watching old DVDs and reading the marked-up scripts the realtor had boxed and left behind in storage. That's when things became personal. Every time I went down there, Anthony said, I'd get this heavy, pressurized feeling. Not fear exactly. More like I wasn't alone. I thought maybe it was just nostalgia, like the room still held energy from all the time Gandolfini spent there. Then the VHS tapes started showing up. They weren't his. The couple didn't even own a VCR. And yet, on the table each morning, there'd be a new one. Unlabeled, dusty, smelling faintly of old wood and vinegar. The first few were blank. Then came one with a clip from a family dinner, Gandolfini laughing with someone off-screen, the image flickering in and out like a dream. We never found out where those tapes came from, Michelle said. In the master bedroom sat an old mirror. It had been there when they bought the place. Heavy and antique-looking, its bronze frame slightly warped from age. They hadn't thought much of it until one morning. Michelle noticed something odd in the reflection. She stood brushing her hair, but in the mirror, there was someone sitting behind her on the bed. A man. Large, hunched forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped, his head low like he was deep in thought. As soon as she turned around, the room was empty. I didn't scream, she said. I just sat on the edge of the tub and stared at the floor for 10 minutes. That's when I started feeling him. She would often smell cigar smoke in the bathroom late at night. The TV would turn on by itself, always tuned to reruns of The Sopranos. Sometimes only audio played, lines from Tony Soprano in quiet, fragmented bursts, like an echo in another room. Friends and family who visited started noticing it too. One guest, a fellow screenwriter, refused to stay in the house again after waking up to what he described as a large shadow standing in the corner of the guest room. Another friend swore she heard whispering in the hallway, "Go back! Go back!" Even their dog, Leo, refused to enter the screening room in the basement. He'd plant his feet and growl at the doorway. Anthony, who had been a skeptic for most of his life, changed his tune after what he called the library event. He had gone into the old study to grab a notebook, when all the books on the shelf suddenly fell, one by one, in a slow, deliberate wave from left to right. It was silent. No quake. No draft. Just the sound of thudding books and then breathing. Not his own. The Barrises finally brought in a local historian who specialized in Hollywood lore. He had heard stories about Gandolfini's deep emotional connection to the house, how he'd retreat there when overwhelmed by fame, to write, to cry, to be alone. He had always said he'd never sell it, that it was his last good place. He's not angry, the historian told them. He's still here, but not to harm you. He just doesn't know he's gone. After that, things became quieter. The couple began speaking aloud to the house, thanking it, acknowledging Gandolfini's presence. They kept the mirror. They left the screening room untouched. They stopped trying to change the house, and the house, in turn, stopped changing them. It's been over a year now. The Barrises still live there. They say the energy in the house feels gentler now. At times, Michelle still smells cigar smoke late at night. Occasionally, they still hear the faint creak of floorboards upstairs. But nothing ever feels threatening. He just didn't want to be forgotten, Anthony says. And we haven't forgotten him, Michelle adds. He's still here, just quieter now. It was early October when Michelle began noticing the armchair in the den had moved. At first, she chalked it up to her own forgetfulness. She'd leave the room, return with tea, and the chair, an oversized leather club chair they'd inherited with the house, would be angled differently, turned ever so slightly toward the corner of the room where an old framed photo hung crooked on the wall. A black and white shot of 1950s New York City, fog curling between brownstones, men in coats and hats, all mid-stride. James Gandolfini had reportedly loved that photo. It reminded him of the East Coast, of home. Michelle would adjust the chair back, assuming it had simply been bumped, maybe during vacuuming. But within hours, it would slowly rotate again, like it had a will of its own. No sound, no tremble in the floor, just a quiet shift of attention in the room, as if someone was still sitting there, quietly staring. One night, unable to sleep, she padded down the hall barefoot. The house was dark, save for a dim amber glow from a street lamp outside filtering through the slatted blinds. When she passed the den, she saw it. The chair, turned completely away from the room, facing the wall, now facing the photograph, the corner, and nothing else. But what made her stop cold wasn't the chair. It was the indentation, a deep sag in the cushion, the unmistakable shape of someone who had been sitting there. Recently, Michelle didn't scream. She didn't even move. She stood in the hallway for several long minutes, barely breathing, her eyes locked on the stillness of the chair, her ears straining for any sound, any whisper of breath, any creak of floorboards behind her. There was nothing, only that oppressive stillness, that weight in the air, like a theater seconds before the curtain rises. She backed away, step by step, never turning her back on the room. Anthony began to notice the cold spot in late November. It wasn't a draft, not the kind you feel near a window or vent. This was localized, a patch of air no more than 3 feet wide near the threshold of the master bedroom. It always hovered there, like an invisible figure standing guard. It didn't matter the time of day. He tried to measure it with a smart thermometer 15 degrees cooler than the surrounding air. It would disappear only to return days later, always in the same place. And with it came the sound. Not a voice, not a knock. It was the sound of pages turning, like someone reading slowly, deliberately, the soft swish of a script page being flipped. Anthony once stood there for 10 straight minutes, eyes closed, trying to decipher whether the sound was real. Then he heard the unmistakable tap, tap tap, as if a pen had hit a notebook rhythmically, twice, in thought. He whispered, "Are you still working?" And the cold suddenly rushed through him, like walking through a tunnel. His hands shook, his eyes watered. He felt not fear, but urgency, like something needed to be finished. That night, he went back down into the basement screening room. The VHS tapes were gone, but in their place, stacked neatly on the table, were 4 yellow legal pads. Every page filled with Gandolfini's handwriting, notes on characters, scribbled thoughts about legacy, questions about death. One page simply read, "If you die in character, where do you go?" Anthony didn't sleep that night. It was during a holiday dinner that everything changed. Michelle's sister, Danielle, came to visit with her boyfriend. She wasn't told anything about the house, not about the chair, or the mirror, or the cold spot. She'd flown down from Portland, excited to spend a warm, quiet December in LA. On the second night, She came upstairs pale, clutching her wine glass. "Who's the big guy in the living room?" she asked casually. Michelle blinked. "What do you mean?" "The one sitting in the chair. I walked past the den just now. He was watching TV. I thought it was a neighbor or something." Michelle felt her body go cold. Danielle went back to the room to retrieve her phone. When she returned, the chair was empty. The TV was off. And in the darkened glass of the screen, just for a moment, she saw it a reflection of a man's broad shoulders as he rose slowly from the seat behind her. But when she turned around, no one. Just the photo of New York still slightly crooked on the wall. And the lingering scent of cologne and burnt tobacco. By late January, a persistent dampness had taken root in the hallway outside the guest room, the one that used to be Gandolfini's writing space. No matter how much they aired the place out, no matter the season or hour, there was always that faint smell of wet plaster and something more elusive, something earthy and time-worn. Michelle described it once as old sweat behind velvet curtains. The phrase made Anthony uncomfortable, though he couldn't explain why. One morning, while rearranging a framed poster in the hallway, Michelle noticed something she hadn't seen before. A faint strip of yellowed masking tape stretched across the top of the guest room doorframe, partially hidden beneath a layer of white paint. The tape was brittle to the touch, and scrawled on it in thick black marker, in nearly faded block letters, was a single word. "Keep," she called Anthony over. Together they scraped at the edge of the tape, revealing more hidden words beneath the frame. "Keep door closed, script material JG." That was all. No one had mentioned it during the walkthrough. The realtor never pointed it out, and none of the inspectors had noted anything unusual. The door had always just been another door. That night, Anthony stood alone in the hallway, facing that door, remembering all the odd things that happened inside that room, muffled voices when the house was empty, the scent of warm coffee that drifted from behind it in the middle of the night, the lights that flickered whenever someone walked past. The house felt paused. He reached for the doorknob. Inside, the guest room was still set up sparsely: queen bed, dresser, beige curtains, and a single reading lamp on a small pine nightstand. But the moment Anthony stepped in, something about the air shifted. It wasn't colder. It was denser, as if the walls remembered every moment of silence, every breath, every hesitation that had ever occurred within them. There was a gravity in the room, pulling inward. He sat on the bed and looked at the far wall. The old bookshelf stood there still, mostly empty, save for a few forgotten paperbacks and a dusty photo frame turned to face the wall. When he picked it up, his heart slowed. The photograph was faded, slightly curled at the edges. A younger Gandolfini sat in the middle of a couch, surrounded by friends and family. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't acting. He looked tired, worn in the way a man looks when he's lived too much too fast. His eyes didn't meet the camera. They stared just past it, past the photographer, past the room. Anthony placed the photo back down and stood to leave, but the moment his hand touched the doorknob, the room groaned. It wasn't the floor or the pipes. It was the walls themselves. A low, mournful creak, as if the room didn't want him to go. He paused. The air pressed tighter. The bulb in the reading lamp began to hum a high, whining sound that vibrated in his jaw. And then came the voice, not spoken, not aloud, but inside him. "You're not ready to see it." He stepped back instinctively, heart racing, throat dry, unsure if the words were imagined or real. The air was still again. The humming stopped. But that night, when Anthony tried to sleep, he dreamt of a script. A stack of pages, fluttering open in the wind, on a table beside a burned-out cigar. He couldn't read the title, only the first line of dialogue. What happens when the curtain closes and the actor forgets who he was? From that day on, the house changed. It wasn't dramatic, not doors slamming or windows rattling. It was subtler, rhythmic, almost human. Every evening at 8:10 p.m. sharp, the TV in the den would power on, regardless of whether it was plugged into a smart timer or not. It always went to the same black and white film on the waterfront. Michelle tried removing it from the streaming queue, even deleted the app entirely, but it returned. Always at 8:10. Why 8:10? Michelle eventually found an old schedule wedged in the back of the basement drawer. James Gandolfini's writing blocks were written out in tidy, looping script. His nightly think session began at exactly 8:10 p.m. every day. Then came the smell. Not of cigars anymore. Now it was red wine and Italian food, specifically marinara sauce, heavy on garlic. It would fill the kitchen even when nothing was cooking. Michelle, who hadn't eaten meat in years, began craving veal cutlets and fettuccine at midnight. It disturbed her. She woke one night to the sound of pots clanging downstairs. Anthony was next to her. The dog was whimpering under the bed. They crept down together and found the kitchen lights on. A single plate sat on the counter. Empty, clean, and yet, steam rose faintly from it, as if it had just been used. By early March, the house was no longer simply haunted, it was inhabited. Not in the traditional sense. No rattling chains, no blood dripping from walls. The phenomena had matured into a kind of relationship. The house responded to them, reacted. When Michelle would hum in the bathroom mirror, the radio downstairs would softly turn on. Always Sinatra. When Anthony sat in the chair in the den, the air would feel warm again, like a man had just stood and left. The outline in the cushion was always there now, permanent. The dreams became more vivid, more intrusive. Michelle dreamed of dinner tables surrounded by unfamiliar faces, people from the 1960s and 70s. Their accents thick, their smiles wide but tired. Men who whispered about contracts. Women who smoked indoors. Sometimes Gandolfini was at the table. Sometimes he was at the head, not speaking, just watching her. Anthony dreamed of lines. Not lines in a script, but lines of people. Standing in hallways. Standing in the dark. Waiting for something. For him. He began to write them down. One evening, just after dusk, Michelle noticed something strange in the living room. The photograph of New York, the one Gandolfini loved, was wrong. She couldn't say how at first. She just stood in front of it, wine glass in hand, something tugging at the edge of her perception. Then she saw it. A figure, barely visible. In one of the windows of the buildings in the background, where there was once only brick and shadow, there was now a silhouette. A broad-shouldered man standing behind glass. James. She dropped the glass. It shattered, red wine blooming like blood across the tile. Anthony rushed in, found her frozen, pointing. "Look," she whispered. "Tell me I'm crazy." He leaned in, and saw him too. Gandolfini was inside the photograph now. That same week, the old VHS tapes returned. 3 of them, stacked on the basement table as if they'd never vanished. No explanation, no footprints, just there. Anthony and Michelle sat together, lights off, just the old CRT monitor casting its pale, ghostly glow across the walls. The first 2 tapes were static-filled snippets of late-night interviews, candid moments on set, old TV footage. But the third was different. The footage was grainy, handheld. Someone, possibly Gandolfini himself, was filming around the house. The camera moved through the den, then the kitchen. Paused on the crooked New York photo. Then a voice off-screen. "I don't want them to change it." The camera turned. A mirror. And there he was, Gandolfini, looking straight into the lens. Or maybe not into the lens, but past it. Through it. "This house, this place knows me. If I go, where does it all go?" He smiled faintly. That sad, weighty smile the world saw so often but never understood. "Don't sell it. Don't fix it. Just let it breathe." The tape ended with static. Anthony and Michelle sat in silence for a long time. That night, they didn't speak a word before bed. They simply lay there, side by side, both of them awake, listening to the stillness. They didn't try to leave. That was never really an option. Instead, they adapted. The house became less of a residence and more of a collaboration. They hosted fewer guests, kept the furniture where it naturally wanted to be, left the guest room door open now, always. Michelle took up painting. Her first completed canvas was a recreation of the New York photo, but in her version, the window was open, and the silhouette of the man was walking away from the glass. Anthony started writing again. Short monologues, long conversations, almost always about memory, regret, Men who stayed too long in one place. And slowly, quietly, the house began to settle. The mirror no longer showed reflections that didn't belong. The cold spot in the hallway warmed. The tapes stopped appearing. Only the scent lingered, now faint cigar smoke in the evenings, marinara on Sundays. One night, nearly a year after moving in, Michelle stood alone in the den. The lamp buzzed softly. The photograph of New York was still crooked, as always. She lit a candle, and for the first time she spoke aloud, not to Anthony, not to herself. To him. I hope you found whatever you needed, and if you haven't, you're still welcome here. The candle flickered, and the house sighed, not with sorrow, not with unrest, but like a deep breath after a long sleep. Outside, the wind passed through the hills. Inside, everything was still. The Barrises still live there. They don't advertise it. There's no tour, no plaque, no viral video. But among certain circles of screenwriters, actors, and old friends of Gandolfini's, the house is spoken of in low, respectful tones. A place where something remains. Not a ghost, not a haunting, a memory with a body, and a voice. One that sometimes still speaks softly from the dark, saying, "Don't forget me." And they haven't. They never will. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.